Woo. My name is Bob Darrell, and I am alcoholic. And I'm sober today only through the grace and power of God in the program, the people, and the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd like to thank the committee for the privilege of coming down here and sharing with you, really, the gift that you gave me. I'd especially like to thank Lisa and Kim for all their help getting down here. Lisa, I thanked her before the meeting. She said, just say something nice about me from the podium. So I'm doing that. I'd like to thank Doug. He picked us up at the airport, and he's going to be taking us back to New Orleans, and we're going to be there for a couple days and flying out. So I wanted to thank him ahead of time and let you guys know that Doug's one of the kindest, honest, humblest, most dedicated members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the people in the Louisiana area don't appreciate everything he does. He's taking me back to the airport. I'm really glad to be here. I always get a little nervous doing this. I'm not really a speaker, even though I get asked to do this a lot. And I'm a drunk that's experienced the impossible, the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous in my life. I'm just curious. Can I see? Would you raise your hand if you're sober less than a year? Wow. I'm really glad you're here. I'm real glad you're here. I got to tell you that one of the basic truths that I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous is that I have a disease called alcoholism. And it's a disease that can only be treated in a state of absolute abstinence. So the name of the game for guys like me, and I presume like you, becomes that you don't drink no matter what. You don't drink if your old lady sleeps with a trash man. You don't drink if you sleep with a trash man. You don't drink. And in a state of abstinence, in rooms like this, you can eventually be introduced to a process that's outlined in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that is designed to recreate your life, to do the impossible, to create a miracle. I'm one of those kind of guys. I think I was born an alcoholic. Before I ever took a drink, there was something peculiarly different about me. I seemed to always be a step out of line. And I've had guidance counselors and therapists and psychologists and parole officers and bosses and my folks and people tell me all my life that I just was self-destructive or I was irresponsible. And I don't think that's it at all. I have this disease called alcoholism. And the book says that if I'm an alcoholic, I'm bodily and mentally different from my fellows. And I got to tell you a story, something that happened to me when I was about 3 or 4 years old. I lived in Pennsylvania, and I went one Sunday afternoon with my folks to a farmer's market. And at this farmer's market, all the farmers brought in all their produce, and there was this one booth there that my dad was real excited about going to see. And this booth, once a year, this farmer came in and he brought these jars of this specially grown and ground horseradish that was supposedly the hottest in the country. And my dad was so excited about getting some of this horseradish because he liked that kind of stuff. And now here I am, I'm tagging along with him. I'm just 3, 4 years old, and my dad's going on and on to my mom about how powerful this horseradish is. So he got my attention. I'm a little kid. I said, I'd like some of that. My dad said, oh no, you can't have any of this. This is only for adults. You're not big enough. Well, I'm the kind of guy that if you tell me I can't have something, I really want to have that, whatever it is. I may not even be interested until you tell me I can't have it. And I waited until my folks were seeing one of the neighbors, and I snuck into the kitchen and I got the refrigerator door open and I got this jar of horseradish out. And I'm sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor with it between my knees, and I got a big spoon, and I take the lid off and I put that spoon in that jar of horseradish and I put it in my mouth, and I think I found God. Tears are coming out of my eyes, snot's dripping down my face. I spew horseradish all over the kitchen. Now I got to tell you, I got real sick as a result of that. That was an awful lot of years ago. I have never once since then sat down on the kitchen floor with a jar of horseradish and done that again. I haven't had to get a sponsor, go to no rehab, or work no goddamn 12 steps. But I also got to tell you that if that horseradish had done for me what alcohol did for me, I'd have spent the next forever making myself sick with that stuff every chance I could get. But I didn't have the allergy to horseradish that I eventually found that I had to alcohol. And I think I was an alcoholic from the very first drink because I experienced what the book talks about, that phenomenon of craving. Dr. Silkworth says that we are people who are different from other people because we have a physical allergy to alcohol. And unlike other allergies, this allergy manifests itself in a phenomenon of craving. Now, I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous as a young kid in an institution, and I heard people talk about the phenomenon of craving, and I couldn't relate to it because I had seen movies like The Lost Weekend and Days of Wine and Roses, and when I drank, I got drunk, and I always did that, but it wasn't a craving, so I thought. And the funny thing about a craving is that you don't realize that you have it until it's interrupted. That's why there's a test in the big book in chapter 3. It says if you're not sure if you're an alcoholic, step up to the nearest bar, try some controlled drinking. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Now, I don't recommend that test because I think some of us wouldn't survive it. But I had to go back into my own experience and see the times in my life where I drank and had been cut off. And I seem to have an inability to do that by self-examination. And how it happened for me that I started to understand that I had this disease that you guys have is I was sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was listening to a woman share her experience. And the miracle of AA for me has always been that you never have tried to tell me anything about me directly. And I'm one of those kind of guys all my life. People are trying to tell me things about me. And the problem is if you try to tell me I'm an alcoholic, you try to tell me I'm self-centered, or you try to tell me I'm afraid, or any of those things, I have certain defense mechanisms that come into play and I can't hear it. Because my mind starts saying how that's not me. But I'm sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and nobody's trying to tell me anything, and this woman's talking about her. And because she's not trying to tell me anything about me, my defense mechanisms are down. And I'm listening to her talk about herself, and I'm identified. And she shared an experience that had happened to her, and it brought to mind something that had happened to me when I was about 18 years old. Now, when I was 18 years old, there was no way I was an alcoholic. Matter of fact, when I was 18 years old, I was going through my hippie phase, better living through chemistry, and I wasn't drinking that much then. I was doing some other things that we don't talk about in Alcoholics Anonymous that much. And I was invited to a girl's house for dinner that I'd been dating. And I guess she wanted me to meet her family. And I've never liked things like that. I always feel like I'm under the microscope. But I went. I'm a good guy trying to do the right thing. And I'm at the dinner table, and they had a bottle of wine. And I always drank quickly. I don't know why. I drank quickly. Maybe evaporation's a childhood issue with me or something. I don't know. I don't know why. But I drink quickly. I drink with a sense of urgency. And because I drink quickly, I get 2 glasses of wine down. And they're all still sipping on their first glass, and the bottle's dead. And I'm sitting there at the dinner table. I got to spend the rest of the evening there, and I got 2 glasses of wine in me. And sitting there, and I'm getting uncomfortable, and I don't understand why I'm getting uncomfortable. I'm just getting a little antsy. And I don't know anything about alcoholism, about the phenomenon of craving, this physical allergy, anything. I just know I'm getting uncomfortable. I finally said to him, I said, boy, that sure was good wine. They said, well, that's nice. We don't have any more. And they went back to talking about Vietnam and sports and everything. I sat there and I got a little more uncomfortable. And I finally blurted out, sure like beer. And they said, well, that's nice. We don't have any beer. And they went back to talking. And a couple minutes later, I announced that I've learned to enjoy a good cocktail with dinner. And they said, well, we're sorry, Bob, we don't have anything. We didn't know. Next time you come over, we'll have beer and wine or whatever you want. It's fine, but we don't have anything. And they went back to talking about sports and everything, chit-chat. And I'm sitting there at the dinner table with 2 glasses of wine in me, and I'm going crazy. And I don't know what's going on with me. And they're talking about all this mundane stuff, and there's a part of me that wants to scream at them to shut up. And there's another part of me that's ashamed that I even thought that, because they're such nice people. And my head's going faster and faster, and I don't know what to do. And I excuse myself, I go to the bathroom, I lock the door, and like a crazed animal, I went through all the cabinets in there until I found a bottle of cough medicine that was 35% alcohol with codeine and terpene hydrate. And I sat down on the edge of the bathtub and I chugged this bottle of cough medicine so I could think. And it was like all of a sudden there was hope. And I sat there on the edge of the tub and I came up with this plan, and I went back out to the dinner table and I explained how I'd forgotten about this appointment that I had, and I had to take care of this certain thing, and I was so sorry. And I apologized for that I had to leave so early, and I told him we must do this again. And I went and I got in my car and I drove like a gentleman, 25 miles an hour down to the end of the street. And then I drove probably 90 miles an hour through this suburban area to get to a guy's house who had a bar in his basement because I had 2 glasses of wine. Now, I was the only person at that dinner table. If those other people would have been alcoholics, we'd all been in that bathroom looking through those cabinets. But I have a disease that sets me apart and is distinctive to me as an alcoholic. The normal people never experience that sense of more that guys like me experience. And I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and got sober in 1978, and I believed secretly for a lot of years, even in sobriety, that everyone felt the same way from a few drinks of alcohol that I felt. I just thought that for some reason, other people were able to control it better than I was able to. That in that area, I was weak-willed. And I thought that everybody experiences that feeling like they want to have another drink once they've had a drink. And Dr. Silkworth, in the doctor's opinion, says that's not so, that we're the only people that experience that. And it really got brought home to me when I was about 4.5 years sober. I was dating a gal that wasn't an alcoholic. And we would go out to dinner, and she would order a drink, and I swear to God it would take her a half hour to drink it. Just drive me crazy. She'd take a sip and then talk for 10 minutes. I mean, that's like alcohol abuse, right? And the whole time I knew her, I would often see her order 2 drinks, and I never saw her finish 2 complete drinks. She would order the second drink, she'd drink a half of it, a third of it, 2/3 of it, and she would push it aside, and she'd say the most peculiar thing you've ever heard. She'd say, I don't want any more, I'm starting to feel it. Let me tell you, and I don't want to offend anybody, but it would be easier for me as an alcoholic to have sex, and after 2 strokes, say, I don't want any more of that, I'm starting to feel it, than it would be to do that with 2 drinks. And I started to get it, that I really am bodily and mentally different from those people out there. See, my friend, when she pushed away the second drink, she wasn't trying to prove a point. See, I'm capable of that, and I think most of us are capable when our mate's on our back or our boss is on our back and we go out to lunch with our boss or somebody, we can have two to show them. But she wasn't trying to prove anything to me. When she took 2 drinks, she got a feeling like she was losing control. I take 2 drinks, I get a feeling like I'm getting control. And alcohol does something different for me, and it sets me apart. And it's the reason I'm here in Alcoholics Anonymous. But if that was the whole deal with alcoholism, then in 1971, as a young kid, in my first institution for alcoholism, I'd have sworn off like I had done many, many times and said, I'm never going to do that again. It's killing me, and I just wouldn't. Except that there's another aspect to this disease. The book calls it alcoholism a spiritual malady. And if you're like I am, for all practical purposes, my alcoholism always started where the bottle ended. And it was the insanity of abstinence that always got to me. I quit drinking a lot of times. I went to AA from 1971 to 1978. I was in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got sober a lot of times, and what would become very apparent to me, sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, is that whatever is wrong with you can't possibly be the same thing that's wrong with me. Because I stopped drinking, I'm sitting in your meeting, and I don't feel like you look. It seemed to me that everyone in Alcoholics Anonymous quit drinking and became wonderful. They quit drinking and they loved everyone. They quit drinking, they were grateful for everything. I mean, my wife just died. I'm so grateful, you know. And here I'm sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm restless, irritable, and discontented. You take alcohol out of my life, and in short order, I start to feel like a fish out of water. Abstinence, to me, always felt like I was doing time. And if you ever sat in a county jail waiting to get out, you know what it feels like to do time. And what would happen to me over and over and over again is that I would get physically sober, I would come to Alcoholics Anonymous, I would be desperate because the heat's on. And I would sit in your meetings and die of alcoholism because I'm just sitting here. There's a tremendously long and crowded parade of people that come through Alcoholics Anonymous on their way to the graveyard. And I was part of that parade. I came to the meetings. I didn't have a sponsor. I didn't work any steps. I didn't do any service in AA. I had no relationship with a power greater than myself. I didn't clean up the wreckage of my past. I just went to the meetings, and I would sit in here and die of alcoholism. And I couldn't understand what was happening to me. And the people in Alcoholics Anonymous made me very uncomfortable. First of all, you take alcohol out of my life, and I don't do well around happy, enthusiastic people. I mean, you make me crazy. I don't even understand you. I don't know what you are. You look like a cross between the Salvation Army and Amway or something. I mean, you know, just all these enthusiastic do-gooders, you know. And here I sit in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm in a lot of pain and I'm in a lot of discomfort. But I can't even tell anybody because I don't even know what to tell you. I mean, how do you explain what it feels like to have untreated alcoholism? It's not that anything's wrong. It's just that nothing's right. I love W.C. Fields. He says, I was sober one time. It was the most boring 45 minutes of my life. I understand that. And so I sit in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I die of alcoholism until I can't stand it anymore. And no matter what's at stake, no matter if I'm on paper, no matter if I'm living in a halfway house with no place to live, no matter what's at stake, eventually I just get it up to here with being sober. And it's not that I want to destroy my life. I just got to have some relief. And I get a weekend pass, or I go somewhere and I pick up a drink, and the phenomenon of craving kicks in and I can't stop. just to trash my life one more time, to crawl out of the weeds or end up in a county jail, to come back into some halfway house, back to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I did that for almost 7 years. And I'm going to tell you about my second to the last drunk, and then I want to get sober. In 1977, I went on a drunk with another guy I was in a halfway house with in Pennsylvania. And one night, he'd passed out in his trailer, and I'm not done drinking. So I borrowed his car, a little bit of money laying on the counter, and went out to get some more beer. And I got in a felony hit and run DUI, got arrested, did almost 3 months in the county jail back there because I was homeless and destitute and I couldn't get out on bail. I went before a judge, and I got before the judge and he sentenced me to 2 years in a state prison. And I have always had this great fear of doing law. I don't jail well. Some people jail well. I don't jail well. I've been to jail a lot. I don't do it. I don't like it. It's not, some people like it. They just fit right in. I've never fit right in there. I don't know. He sends me to 2 years in prison, and then he does something that's very unusual. He stays the commitment. And he reads this probation and parole report, and he says there's only one place left in this part of the country that'll take you, because I burn out every other hospital, treatment center, halfway house in that whole part of Pennsylvania. He says a place called the Ark House, and it wasn't really a treatment center. They housed about 200 or 300 homeless winos. And he says, if you'll go into this place for a year and then come back before me on this date a year from now, and you've made the restitution, you got good UAs, good parole and probation report, you do everything you're supposed to do, you don't have to do the 2 years. But if you don't do any of those conditions, I've already signed the papers, you're just automatic, you go up. So I went into this place called the Ark House, and if there was ever a time in my life when I was more serious about not drinking, I can't remember it. I think I might have even been more determined to fight the bottle than I am today. Winter's coming on. I have no place to live. I burn out everybody. There's nobody left in my life. I'm all alone. I have no place to stay. I can't work. If I get thrown out of this place, and besides going to prison for 2 years, I'm going to be on the streets in the snow until they finally pick me up. And I don't want to do that again. I did that before. I know what it's like to walk the streets all night long because you can't sit down because it's 20 degrees, 15 degrees. You sit down, you freeze to death. So I'm in this place, this rehab, determined not to drink, and I'm going to the in-house AA meetings. But nothing's changing. And several months go by, and I know I'm getting ready to drink. I know it. I can feel it. What starts to happen to me is I start to get real uptight and real withdrawn and real depressed. I'm antsy. I'm restless. And I don't want to drink again. And I'm desperate. And after an in-house meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous at this place, I grabbed an old-timer in AA. This guy was sober forever. Must have been a year and a half. And I started to open up to him in a way that I'd never really opened up to anybody in AA before. And I told him everything that was going on with me. I told him about the 2 years in prison. I told him about my 6 years of failure trying to stay sober. I told him I had this mental problem, and I didn't understand what it was, but my head was just full of all these conversations that never stopped. It was like you take alcohol out of my life, and living with my mind is like driving cross-country in a van full of 8-year-olds that have overdosed on sugar, and none of them like you. Just like, and it's all this what if stuff. Just crazy stuff. I got emotional problems, and I don't understand. Maybe I need another psychiatrist. I've been to so many of them. But the emotional thing is I can be sitting in the TV room in the halfway house, and I can be doing fine. 2 minutes later, I'm almost suicidally depressed, and nobody's even said anything to me. Right? Nothing's even happened. I just go on this roller coaster ride that's insane. And I'm telling him about this. I can't work. I can get a job, but I can't keep a job. Because I don't mix well with people. Sober, I can't fit. I just get on the muscle around people. I don't mean to, but I just am so uptight that eventually they don't want me to work with them anymore because I'm not a team player. And I don't mean to be that way. And I'm telling him all about this stuff. I'm telling him about the shame and the guilt for the things I did to my family and some of the people that really cared about me over the years. And I said to him, I need help. I got to do something. I don't want to drink again. I don't want to sober up again. And he pointed to the wall of the meeting room. And on the wall is this big canvas sheet with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said to me, he says, Bob, he says, we have these 12 steps. If you'll do those, things will change. And I thought to myself, my God, I've seen those steps before. I got to really read them this time. And I sat there and I read them. And I read them really, I took 5 or 10 minutes and I read them and I'm reading them and I'm thinking about them. And it became very apparent to me that he probably hadn't heard anything I had told him at all, because there's nothing in those 12 steps that correlates or relates to anything I've told him at all. Nothing. I mean, there's not even a vague connection to my problems. It's like I need a set of steps, like step 1, make Bob's police record disappear. Step 2, make his family realize how wrong they'd been about him. Step 3, bring her back, properly ashamed of herself. Step 4, let him sleep at night. Step 5, just get him to feel the way the other people in AA seem to feel. But instead, we had these steps. One of my favorite ones when I was looking there was, turn my will and my life over to the care of God. Now that's a humdinger if you're a newcomer. I mean, that's a... I don't know about you, but I was raised with a lot of religious upbringing. And by the time I was 12 years old, I was been told about this God who existed to judge me. And he could see in the dark, which is not good for me. That's a bad deal. He could read my mind, which is hideous. I remember the nuns used to say, you got to be pure of thought, word, and deed. And they'd say the word pure, it's like X-rated movies start going through my head, And I don't want to think that stuff. I can't stop it. I just can't stop it. So turn my will, my life over to the care of God. I'd rather turn it over to a narcotics agent. I mean, And then the one that really got my attention was the 8th and 9th step, making amends. I know about amends. I've had to make a lot of restitution through probation and parole departments. I know about amends. But I couldn't imagine. I lived on the streets for a lot of years. And I did stuff that I never heard people in Alcoholics Anonymous talk about. I was the kind of guy that if I met you in a park somewhere and you wanted to help me out and you told me I could sleep on your couch when you went to work, I robbed you. I mean, it wasn't personal, but that's the way I lived. And I hurt an awful lot of people. And I did some things. At one time, in order to save myself from doing 10 years in prison, I turned in some guys that were in this outlaw motorcycle gang, right? I could just picture myself going up to them to make amends. It's like, well, Cheech, I want you to know I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm sorry you had to do the 10 years. Do you forgive me? I'd be better off putting a gun to my head, right? So I never did them. I walked out of that room with my head hung down, realizing that whatever you guys had was nice for you, but my case was different. That I needed something different. I didn't know what it was. I'd been to a lot of therapy. I'd tried a lot of things. And I felt utterly hopeless. See, one of my major problems is that I go on a run, and alcohol takes everything away from me. I come into Alcoholics Anonymous and the first thing I get back is my damn opinion. And it is my opinion and judgment that will always stand between me and anything that God would give me. See, I sat in that room looking at those 12 steps on the wall, and my opinion and judgment told me that they couldn't possibly work for a guy like me. I love the theme of your convention, the keys to the kingdom. What I was being offered at that moment, I was being offered the keys to the kingdom. I was being offered a set of directions that's designed to completely transform my life. But I couldn't believe it was possible. It was like very similar to walking down through the Skid Row area of a major city and seeing some little old man who's been sleeping in the weeds for months crawl out of the bushes, come up to you and ask you for a match. And he's got this little cigarette butt he's found in the gutter, and you give him a light, and he thanks you and he says, "You know, Sonny, I like you. I'm going to give you $10 million. And he reaches into his inside inner coat, he pulls out this scrap of paper that's an old, dirty, greasy check that he's obviously stolen from somewhere place. And he writes out this check for $10 million and he gives it to you. If you're like I am, you'll be real nice and thank him and walk away, and when you're out of sight, you'll tear it up and throw it away because you know it's not any good, except that the check's good." And the guy's Howard Hughes, or somebody like him. And from 1971 to 1978, I tore the check up. And in 1978, I cashed the check. And I'm going to tell you how that happened and what brought me to the point that they talk about in Alcoholics Anonymous. That point is surrender. It was not the homelessness. It was not the shame and guilt of the things I did to my family that brought me to that point that it talks about in the big book, where we become as open-minded and as willing as only the dying can be. It was not facing 2 years in prison. It was none of that stuff. All that stuff, if you're like I am, is just part of the cost of doing business on the streets. We just adjust to it. I mean, you don't adjust to it overnight. It's not like a thing where I came from my parents' house in the suburbs to living in a cardboard box the same week. It's a gradual step down. And alcoholism is a disease of compromise. And I remember the first time I ever drank to the point where I passed out and wet the bed. It was horrible. It was the most humiliating experience of my life. 3 years later, it's like, again, you just adjust to it. None of that stuff's what brought me to my knees to buy this package here that we call Alcoholics Anonymous. What brought me to my knees is a thing that it talks about in A Vision for You. In A Vision for You, it says that we get to a point where we can't imagine life with alcohol and we can't imagine life without it. We will know a loneliness such as few do. We'll be at the jumping off place and we'll wish for the end. See, at the end of my drinking, alcohol had stopped being an effective treatment for the inside emptiness of alcoholism. And I believe with everything in me that for several years, alcohol was the most effective and immediate treatment for alcoholism I've ever found. And I can remember experiences, dozens of them, and you probably all have your own, where maybe you walked into a party and you didn't know anybody and you felt lonely and isolated and uptight and afraid of the people, and it seemed like they're all looking at you. And after 4 or 5 drinks, you can talk to anybody in there about anything. After 4 or 5 drinks, in the early days of my alcoholism, alcohol relieved me of the bondage of self. Because I would walk into that bar, that party, and I would be so locked up inside of me, so internally focused at my own insecurities and sensitivities, that I was absolutely disconnected from you and separate and apart from. 5 or 6 double shots of Jack Daniels and I could come out and play. 5 or 6 double shots of Jack Daniels, I was relieved of the bondage of self. I could be there right now with you right here. I could honestly listen to you and care about what you said. I could be funny, uninhibited. But at the end of my drinking, it wasn't like that. At the end of my drinking, alcohol stopped being an effective treatment for alcoholism. At the end of my drinking, I'm not the guy that's in some Skid Row bar laughing and shooting pool and talking to the girls and telling jokes. At the end of my drinking, I'm the guy that's sitting in the corner drinking himself into oblivion, sometimes crying and hoping nobody will see him, looking out at the other people in the bar that are laughing and having a good time and wondering, what's wrong with me? Because I could remember the glory days. I could remember the days when alcohol did for me what it apparently was still doing for them. And I hungered with everything in me for the effects from alcohol that they still got, that I used to get. But unfortunately, once the party's over, it's just over. And in the book it says that when we get to that jumping off place, we'll wish for the end. And I thought about suicide a lot at the end of my drinking. And it wasn't because of the guilt or shame, it was because I felt like I was stuck. I couldn't live sober. I tried sobriety many times and it was just too painful. And yet I can't live drunk anymore. Alcohol doesn't work either. There's nowhere to go. When I was new in sobriety, a guy in AA gave me a box of books. And they were just novels, had nothing to do with alcoholism. And I've always liked to read. It's a way I kill time. And in one of these books, there was an account in this one book that blew my mind. It told me more about what had happened to me than anything I've ever heard in Alcoholics Anonymous. And this story in the book was an account of these scientists that were doing experiments with the human brain. And they found that in the human brain is a part that in the book they called it the pleasure center. It's the part of the brain that allows you to experience the euphoria from alcohol. So what these scientists did, they took these laboratory rats and they put 2 tiny wire filaments into that part of the rat's brain. They would pass a mild, undetectable electric charge through those wires to stimulate that part of the brain, and the rat would get high. So what they did is they connected the juice to a pedal in the rat's cage, and the rat would learn he could hit the pedal and get high. So the rat would lay on the goddamn pedal. I mean, he wouldn't eat, he don't sleep, he don't do anything, he just lays on that pedal until he dies. Now, there's a lot of people nodding their heads. There's a lot of rats in this room. I mean, we all understand that, right? But that's not what blew my mind. What blew my mind is that after some of these rats have been hitting the pedal for a while, the scientists would come along and he'd turn the juice off. And this time the rat would hit the pedal and nothing would happen. And he'd hit it again and nothing would happen. And again and again and again. And he would finally realize that the party's over. And in every instance, instead of being able to just go back to being a rat, in every instance the rat would curl up in a ball, lay on the floor of the cage to die, because without the juice, there's nothing to live for. And in 1978, I felt like that rat. I got to tell you, I didn't want to get sober. What I wanted with everything in my being is I wanted to be able to drink like I drank when I was 18 or 20 years old. I would have done anything to do that. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous in 1978 the last time because I finally accepted the impossibility of that. I had tried for several years to recapture those moments of the past and failed. And the information finally got from here down into here that the party is really over. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous to die. I came here with the thought that I'm going to learn how to play hearts with these old men in the back of the AA meetings for the rest of my life, and just that's it. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and I started doing some things I'd never done before. I got a sponsor. I started going to meetings. I joined a home group. And my home group's the Floating Big Book group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you ever come to Las Vegas, look us up. I think it's the best group in the known universe. And I joined that group because members of that group took meetings into the detox I was in 1978. They've always been one of the most active meetings for H&I work in southern Nevada. And I got involved in that group, and my sponsor and the people of that group started having me to form some habits in my life that really changed my life. My sponsor told me that it was my job to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous whenever possible. That if there was a meeting going on anywhere in town and I didn't have a prior commitment somewhere else, it was my job to be there. And I started going to 10, 15, 20 meetings a week. I still go to a lot of meetings a week. I'm sober. I'm coming up on 19 years, and I still probably go to 7 or 8 meetings every week. Now, there's probably someone in here that thinks, well, my God, if you're sober that long, you probably don't need to go to that many meetings. You might be right. I don't know. But I got to tell you, I'd rather go to one or two too many than that one not enough. They told me I had to hit my knees every morning and ask whoever or whatever is running the universe for help. My sponsor, Steve, has said to me, he says, I know you don't believe in God. It doesn't make any difference. Just do it anyway. And after I'd been hitting my knees for about 2 weeks, I went to him and I said, wait a minute, I go to meetings and I hear people in Alcoholics Anonymous talk about praying from driving the car while they're walking down the street. How come I got to get down on my knees and pray? He said, you're right. There's a lot of people that don't have to get down on their knees and pray, but guys with egos like yours do. And so I get down on my knees every morning, every night. I've been doing that for almost 19 years. He told me that I had to try to get transparent with someone in Alcoholics Anonymous on a regular basis, that I had to tell someone else what was going on inside of me, the little petty fears and insecurities. So I've always been good. I can tell you the big stuff, but the little stuff, that when I walk into a meeting and somebody doesn't say hi to me and I sit there for half the meeting and plot their death, I mean, that's the kind of stuff I don't want to tell anybody, right? And I started to have to become transparent about all the petty, self-centered, immature, selfish little thoughts and feelings that I was full of. And my sponsor said, I want you to try to do something for somebody else every day. And he gave me an assignment. He says, for right now, what that something's going to be, he says, every meeting you go to, he says, you're sober only a few weeks. He says, I want you to look for the people that are sober a few days, and I want you to go up to them, and I want you to do everything you can to make them feel welcome. And he says, I want you to know that you're possibly the only one in the meeting new enough to really remember with clarity the difficulty of being a newcomer in AA, and your experience may be vital to that person to let him know he's not alone, that there's actually someone there that knows how he feels. And I had a mission, and I started shaking hands at the door, and greeting people and welcoming the newcomers and going out to coffee with them. And the last thing he says, I want you to do some work out of the big book every day. And I was grateful to fall into the hands of members of Alcoholics Anonymous who believed in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. They didn't believe in anything else. And I was taken through the steps the way they're outlined in the big book. And if there's anyone in this room that's thinking about getting into the steps and you have a sponsor that's giving you some guidelines from some rehab or something, I'd get another sponsor. Now, that's just my opinion, but I'm right. This program that you're sitting in, if you're new, I want to tell you, this is Alcoholics Anonymous. This is nothing else. And we have a design for living in that book that is guaranteed to create a miracle in your life. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a self-help program. We are people who are beyond self-help. We are people who need a goddamn miracle. My sponsor got on this kick when I was fairly new. He had me reading page 60 through 63 of the big book every day. And as some of you have read it, it's about the actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the scenery, the ballet. And I start reading this and I go to meetings and I could see how there were people in my home group that were doing that. And I all of a sudden knew why he wanted me to read that. He wanted me so I could enlighten him. And I got to tell you, it's a tough, lonely business when you have that divine awareness of how everybody is and how they should be. And we will always see our defects of character in others before we can see them in ourselves. And I could see that you were self-centered. And I could see that you were trying to run the show. And I could see how you were driven by 100 forms of fear. But I couldn't see it in me yet. And I'll tell you about one of the greatest days in my life. I was the secretary of a Tuesday night meeting. I was having one of those, it was Tuesday, I was having one of those bad days at work. I was working as a cashier in a store. One of those days where the customers just all want attention. I mean, you know, they're just all demanding, they're all self-centered, they all want help. They're all just, what they're really doing is they're cutting into my thinking time. And I'm fed up with the job. I get out of work. I got to go to this grocery store to get some styrofoam cups for the meetings. I get the styrofoam cups. I'm in a hurry because I got to meet this new guy a half hour before the meeting at the meeting hall. And I get in the 9 items or less line with these cups, and there's some woman in front of me with 12 items, right? And I'm counting them. And in my mind, I'm committing murder. I'm like choking her to death, you know. It's just insane. I get in my car. I'm like a pressure cooker that's building up steam the whole day. I get in the car and people are driving slow. There's some little old lady in front of me that's going 5 miles underneath the speed limit. I want to run her off the road. That'll show her, you know. Just crazy, just insane. I get to the meeting hall. I sit my newcomer in the seat where I know he can hear everything. I get the literature set out. I wait for people to start coming. I pick the chairman and the co-chairman that I know is going to lead the kind of meeting my newcomer needs to hear, right? I even tell him, I said, now we're not going to read chapter 5 tonight. We're going to read chapter 3. I got it all set up. It's going to be wonderful. This guy's going to really get help. He's going to take his year cake, give me credit. It's going to be great. I mean, it's just... They start the meeting and some guy in the room raises his hand and he starts talking about drugs. Somebody else in the meeting jumps in and starts yelling at him that you can't talk about that in an AA meeting. Somebody else jumps in and tells the other guy you can't tell people what to say in an AA meeting. And it's like a war going on in this meeting. If you've ever been to a meeting like that, it's like the meeting from hell. I mean, it's awful. It's awful. And I'm sitting there and I'm getting angry. My new guy's not hearing the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. It becomes real apparent to me that I'm the only one in AA that cares about these new people. By the end of the meeting, I'm quitting Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm fed up with you selfish, self-centered people. I'm just done. I throw the literature into the briefcase. I storm out giving some snide comment to this guy, this old-timer in AA. I go home, and like Pavlov's dog, I've been conditioned to call my sponsor. I call my sponsor up, and he says, read page 60 through 63 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I open the book to page 60, and I start reading, and this time it's not Jim, and it's not Bill, and it's not Mary and Judy, it's me. And for the first time in my life, I got a glimpse of what my real problem is. In the big book it says, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. The root, underneath everything else, is the grand obsession that first and foremost I'm obsessed with self. And self-centered, self-absorbed people like me, it's no wonder we never felt like we fit in this world, because I was so internally focused I wasn't really in this world. I was in this one. And that's why life seemed so very distant from me, and I never felt like I fit. And the great thing about alcohol, when alcohol worked at its very best, is that alcohol turned around the scope and got me, instead of looking in here, I was able to look out here and be out here with you. Alcohol relieved me of the bondage of self. And I got together with my sponsor and I got down on my knees and I said that third step prayer. And I got to tell you something, I don't think I knew what I was saying. I said to my Father, I said, God, I offer myself to Thee for You to build with me and do with me as Thou wilt. And I got to tell you, God took that more serious than I did, because He started doing with me and building with me, and I didn't like any of it. I lost my job. Within 2 months of saying that third step prayer, I ended my first love affair in Alcoholics Anonymous. I lost my job. My roommate got married and moved out. I couldn't afford the apartment that I lived in. I could not find another job in the career field I was in. I had to go take a job for minimum wage as a cashier in a store that I didn't want to do. I had this other plans of things I wanted to do. My life was in turmoil. But God was doing with me and building with me, and I was like an abandoned building. A lot of things had to be torn out, and I didn't like a lot of it because it was change and it wasn't my idea. And I can also stand here to tell you that everything that had happened to me from the moment I took that third step to today, that hasn't been as a result of my self-will and self-will binges, has been absolutely incredible in my life. Absolutely incredible. And I went to my sponsor and I told him I wanted to take a fourth step. And he told me, he says, I want you to read these pages in the big book, chapter 5. And I went to the big book and I tried to read these pages. And it's like it's in English, but it doesn't help. I mean, I don't understand. It's like, I don't know who Mrs. Jones is or Mr. Brown. I don't know any of it. This stuff doesn't make any sense to me. So I made the mistake that a lot of people in AA make. I sat down and I wrote my whole life story out. 40 pages of gruel of everything I was ashamed of. And I got to tell you, I missed the whole deal. The big book says that it's a fact-finding and a fact-facing proposition. That I'm going to discover, if I follow that format, I'm going to learn some things about me and about other people that I never knew. And I didn't do that, and I went to my sponsor, and after I was done, he was very kind, and after I was done, he said to me, he said, you may find it necessary to do another fourth step, and if you do, he holds up this book, he says, we have a book called Alcoholics Anonymous, and I would highly suggest you try to follow this format. And several years later, I started to suffer from untreated alcoholism once again in Alcoholics Anonymous. And you know what started to happen? I think alcoholism, the ism is that I separate myself. And I found myself sitting in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous without ever leaving the room, judging my way right out of AA. I'd sit in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and someone would talk, and I'd run a dialogue in my head over what they were saying. Someone else would share, and I'd think to myself, oh no, not Mr. Gratitude again, you know. And I very slowly, I'm picking apart the people in AA. And I'm distancing myself more and more. Thank God I'd been forced into forming some habits that I never actually stopped going to meetings. I was starting to become restless and irritable, discontent. I was having problems in my job. I kept changing jobs. By this time I'm sober 4.5 years, and I'd had 9 jobs. And every place I ever left, it was their fault. And I knew that it was time to get into action, and I sat down, I started going through the steps again. This time I used the format in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got to tell you, it changed my life. I came out the other side of that, and I had a different relationship with everybody around me. In the book it says, there's the most important part in the fourth step, it says, this was our course. And in the original manuscript, it says, at this point, it says, you must realize at once that the people who had harmed you were perhaps like you, spiritually sick. And I had to do something that a self-centered guy like me would never do, is I had to put myself in the shoes of the people that I resented and see that if I was afraid like they're afraid, if I'm sick like they're sick, if I'd grown up like they were grown up, if I stood in their shoes, how I could have done the exact same thing to someone else that they had done to me. And when I came out the other side of that and I took responsibility, where it says referring to our list, again, we ask ourselves these questions. And I saw for the first time in my life that it wasn't them, it was me. The book says earlier in the chapter, it says that sometimes people hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we will invariably, which I think means almost always, find that at some time in the past we made a decision based on self, which later places us in that position to be hurt. And for the first time in my life, I looked the problem square in the eye, and it was me. That I had set myself apart and separate and at conflict with other people as a result of my own self-centeredness and my own self-will. I belong to a group that's real active in service, and I've been pushed into 12-step work since I was brand new in AA. And it has saved my life. Some of the toughest, my 11th year of sobriety was one of the most painful years of my whole life, drunk or sober. And it was not the old-timers and the profundities of AA that got me through it. It was the newcomers and the guys that I sponsored that relieved me of the bondage of self and kept me doing what I was supposed to do when I didn't feel like doing it. And I'm so grateful to the members of my home group that are so grounded in a principle of giving away Alcoholics Anonymous. I was about 4 years sober, and I was in one of those depressions that I used to get into in early sobriety, where there's nothing really wrong. You're just kind of sitting around thinking, pondering your life. And I'm one of those kind of guys that the more I ponder my life and the more I think about it, the more I realize how screwed up it is. And I'm sitting on the sofa in my apartment and I'm sinking into this depression. I'm realizing that everybody in AA is doing a little better than I'm doing, and my job that I told them all at my home group that I just got that I thought was so great really is terrible. And I'm sitting just going into this abyss. And I was trained in AA that when things aren't right, I was supposed to do 3 things. Ask God for help, call somebody, go to a meeting. So it was about 10 o'clock at night, and there's a meeting at 10:15 about a block from my apartment. I had to actually force myself off the couch. I was so paralyzed by this depression. It was almost like it was physically debilitating. I made myself get up off the couch, get in the car, and I went to this meeting. I'm sitting in the back of the room. The meeting's going on, and I'm not hearing anything because I'm in here, locked up in me thinking. There's a guy in the back of the room who's obviously just coming off a drunk. He's real sick. And he's sitting in the chair and he's grabbing himself and he's rocking back and forth like he wants to fly apart. And he gets up and he paces in the back of the room. And then he goes into the bathroom and you can hear him dry heaving. And he's really annoying because I'm trying to figure out my life here, and it's really annoying stuff. The meeting's over. I haven't heard nothing in the meeting because I'm so into my own head. I've been trained to do service in AA, so I stay after the meeting. I'm helping this guy, Charlie Parker, who's the secretary, set the chairs back up for the church in the morning. We go out. We're the last 2 people leaving the church. He's locking up, and my car's parked right near the front door. And here's this guy from the back of the meeting coming off this drunk. He's laying down, curled up in a fetal position in front of my car. I'm going to have to step over him to get into my car to go home and think. But I can't do that because Charlie's standing there on the porch of the church, and he'll see me do that, and he'll go tell everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous what a bad AA member I am. So I go over and I kneel down, I start talking to this guy, and he's a mess. He's afraid he's going to go into the DTs. And I know what's coming. At that time in Las Vegas, there was no detox. We had the county hospital, and to get a drunk into the county hospital with no money, they'd take you under the Hill-Burton Act, but it was about a 6 to 8 hour ordeal. It was awful. You'd make you wait in that waiting room forever. I'd been there with a lot of guys. So I put this guy in my car. It's late at night. I got to get up for work in the morning. I don't want to do this. I'm resentful. I'm thinking, isn't there anybody else in Alcoholics Anonymous that does this kind of thing? I'm pissed off. I get him in the car. We go down there. We're sitting in the waiting room. I'm giving him cigarettes and getting him glasses of orange juice. And he's telling me about him. And he's telling me how ashamed he is of himself for all the things he'd done to his family. And when I got sober, I was real ashamed of myself for all the things I'd done to my family. He's telling me about how he's thinking about killing himself because he feels so hopeless. And I had thought many times about killing myself because I felt so hopeless. And something happened to me while I was sitting with that guy, that something inside of him reached out and touched something inside of me. And they finally admitted him into the detox ward of the hospital. I'm driving home, it's the middle of the night, and I'm starting to cry. And I'm starting to cry because I finally realized that God was relieving me of the bondage of self over and over again through these people like this. And I was driving home that night, and I got to tell you, I never felt more complete, more whole, more useful, and more at one with God and this universe and myself than I'd felt at that moment. I felt better than I felt when I was 18 years old and I just had 5 shots of Jack Daniels. And it finally got in to hear what the old-timers in Alcoholics Anonymous had been telling me for years, for several years. That is in giving this thing to someone else that I get it. At that moment, I was relieved of the bondage of self. And I started to understand a little bit that that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is about. It's about me trying to think about somebody else. There's a line in our big book. It says, "My very life as an ex-problem drinker depend upon my constant thought of others, their needs, and how we can work for them." Constant. Who did they write that for? Al-Anons? Constant. I'm lucky if I can get a half hour during the day when I'm thinking about other people. Constant. I got to tell you, I've been away. My friend Larry from Las Vegas, and him and I have been down in the Caribbean for the last couple of weeks, and I've been away from my home group for 2 weeks. And I miss my home group, and I miss the guys that I sponsor, and I miss the hospital and institution meetings that I'm involved with every week. It's not that the last 2 weeks haven't been great. They've been incredible. I've been to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous on this island every day. But I haven't had the opportunity to sit down with a new guy or one of the guys I sponsor in over 2 weeks. And that's not good for a guy like me. I need that contact on a regular basis. And I've fixed Larry about as much as he can be fixed, and he's fixed me about as much as he can fix me. And I yearn to get back to that. It's not that I come to a lot of AA conventions. I come to quite a few of them, and I love coming here. But I got to tell you, for me, the substance of Alcoholics Anonymous is when I'm sitting with another guy that's new, and I'm taking him through the steps, or I'm sitting and I'm listening to him talk about himself, and I'm telling him a little bit about me. That is the essence of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm looking forward to getting back to my home group. I'm going to tell you a little story, and then I'm going to end. I heard this probably 18 years ago. And it's the story of my life the last almost 19 years. There's a man, it's a Sunday afternoon, he has a day off, and he's sitting in his easy chair and he's reading the newspaper. And he's got a 6-year-old daughter. And she comes up, she says, "Daddy, please play with me." He says, "Not now, sweetheart. I'm reading the paper. Can't I just read the paper?" And she won't go away. She says, "No, Daddy, please play with me." And he looks in the paper, and there's an ad in there for an airlines. And it's a full-page map of the world showing where these planes fly. And he gets an idea. He tears it out of the newspaper. He tears it up into little pieces. He grabs a roll of Scotch tape. He says, "Sweetheart, here's a puzzle. It's a map of the world. Take it in your room. If you can put it together, bring it back, and I'll play with you for the rest of the day." And he settles back into his easy chair. He figures he's off the hook. She's 6 years old. She don't have a shot. 10 minutes later, she brings it back, and it's taped together perfectly. He says, "My God, sweetheart, how did you do that?" And she said, "It was easy, Daddy. On the back was a picture of a man, and when I put the man together, the world just kind of fell into place." And if you're new, I encourage you with everything in me to grab an old-timer in Alcoholics Anonymous and ask him to be your sponsor and get him to take you through the process in this book. And you will observe the most incredible miracle of your whole life. You will see a world that you never fit in, that has always been alien and hostile to you, become the most treasured place you've ever been. Thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome. I too have one of those sponsors that makes me read those pages, and thank God for sponsors that makes me do things. And I want to offer, also thank Lisa for asking me to come up here and share. This is really neat and frightening. And the committee, thanks. We want to offer you this little gift basket here, Bob, and tell you how much we truly appreciate you coming to Louisiana. And please come back. Let's see. The next speaker meeting is looks like 9 a.m. in the morning, and we have a night owl meeting tonight at 10 p.m. We have a new registered count. It's 939. It says here to close with the Lord's Prayer. So if y'all join me.